what we're going to talk about today is kind of the convergence of a number of legislative, rulemaking, legal, and demographic trends that are really going to redefine accessibility the way we've never seen it interpreted before in the marketplace. Ultimately, what this means, it's great opportunity for companies that can position properly and be first to market with accessible solutions. For those that can't, it's got to be a very painful process. But I think by the time I finished the presentation, and Shannon, if you could give me a 5 when I hit the 5-minute mark so I don't go over that, I'd appreciate that. I think you'll see how all this stuff is really kind of converging together, and that's what's going to put pressures not only on what traditionally have been the federal and state marketplace for accessibility, but actually corporate America. So what we're going to talk about today is ADA, which has been around for quite a while, but now it's being interpreted a bit differently by the Department of Justice. 508 compliance, 508 version 2, which is a harmonization with the international WCAG standards. 503 compliance, 504 compliance, which has been around for a while, but again is basically being reinterpreted now due to technology and different factors in the workplace. Aging in the workplace. We have about 70 million baby boomers in this country, and because of 2008, 49% have indicated they will be retiring at 70 and 72. And we know statistically that 50% of people over the age of 65 develop some type of visual or mobility disability. So you got to have a workforce that's got to get older, that's got to require accommodation. So all these things come together, and it kind of creates a perfect storm in the area of accessibility. And then concluding remarks. And of course, interactive. If you have questions, just stop me and just ask, and we'll just go from there. First with a little bit about my background. I started Criterion 508 Solutions back in 2000. We're a Section 508 pure play. We basically create, we're auditors. We federal contractors specifically, and more corporate clients under contract have to be 508 compliant. They bring us their applications. We audit, they fix, we re-audit, they fix, we finalize, provide them with a document trail certification, VPAT statement, and any other support that they need to deliver under contract with any agency that they do business with. Most of our client base is Fortune 500. My background, I've been in technology since the early 90s. Master's degree, specialist degree, a doctoral program from Drake University in instructional design and education. So I've got an extensive background in a lot of verticals, insurance, utilities, and the e-learning marketplace as well. So I started the company basically due to a situation that I was dealing with where I couldn't do the 80-hour-a-week executive routine consulting for my clients anymore. And this was something that I had always enjoyed doing. So I just built a company around it with the organizational structure that would allow me the flexibility to do it in the way that I wanted to. So most of my employees are disabled, and I have about 5 audit teams of 5 individuals that work on any given project, and they do a fantastic job. So basically, when it comes to accessibility, it's a little bit about the carrot and the stick. And historically, when people are presented with accessibility issues and requirements, they view it as being hit with the stick. You know, it's part of the RFP. They have to do it. They weren't prepared for it. They didn't budget revenue, they didn't budget money for it. They didn't budget resources for it. And they're getting hit with this requirement in order to go after a contract opportunity. So the circumstances in which they are first exposed to 508 or any kind of accessibility requirement is usually rather unpleasant. Then there's the carrot, and the carrot is what I really want to focus on today, which is the business opportunity with accessibility. Right now, basically, Americans with disabilities manage $247 billion in disposable income in the United States, and they represent a customer base equal to the U.S. Hispanic market. Now, you talk to any CEO, chief marketing officer, COO, and ask them why would they knowingly ignore a marketplace with this kind of income at their disposal. And most of them will tell you they weren't even aware that they were ignoring them. But the reality is, in the retail space in particular, Target was a great example. People with disabilities could, back in 2006, they could fill up their shopping cart online, but they couldn't check out. That would be completely unacceptable at a Target brick and mortar store, but nobody realized that that was an issue for their clients who were shopping online who had disabilities. Target didn't see it as a business issue. They saw it as a legal issue, hence it went to litigation, civil action, class action status, $6 million punitive penalties, and then they fixed the website anyways. And they could have fixed the website for the cost of an executive golf outing to start out. Okay. Today, Target is probably one of the most aggressive retailers dealing with accessibility, particularly in the mobile space. They learn from it, they see the business side of it, and they're going to capitalize on it. So you're going to see some great things from Target over the next year and a half. But it's quite simple. If your organization and information technology isn't accessible to employees internally and consumers with disabilities, they'll go away. And as you're going to see with some of the numbers and some of the new initiatives, accessibility is no longer something that you deliver to somebody else under contract. This is now, you got to clean up your own house. Your own IT enterprise internally needs to be made accessible to accommodate the needs of employees with disabilities and aging in the workplace as well. So eventually what I see happening is the concept of accessibility itself will merge almost entirely with user experience, user design expertise, and people will be more focused on dealing with the cultural and organizational issues of having so many people in the workplace that are either aging or disabled, and creating an environment that is most productive for everybody so you have a successful business. So let's revisit the ADA, which has been around since 1973, and it basically required that state and local governments provide qualified individuals with disabilities equal access to their programs, services, and activities. What changed was last December. Most of you know that there's been extensive litigation over accessibility in the courts over the last 6-7 years, and I can tell you right now there's got to be a heck of a lot more this year and next year based on what I'm hearing, but under different provisions than just 508. But Department of Justice came out in December and they said, as far as we're concerned, the argument is over. The internet is a public space. We consider it a public space under the ADA. And as far as we're concerned, we're going to enforce web accessibility for everybody who does business on the internet, just like everybody who does business out here on the street from an architectural barriers perspective. And that was kind of the shot over the bow. They gave everybody a heads up. And what happened next in March of this year was absolutely incredible from a litigation standpoint. The Justice Department entered a consent decree with the National Tax Preparer H&R Block. Now, mind you, what had happened was two individuals, I believe with visual disabilities, had filed a suit in district court that they could not file their income taxes using the H&R Block portal, and that was discriminatory towards them. The Department of Justice did what's called an intervention. They basically sat there and inserted themselves into this case because they thought it was a good case to make a statement, really, to the rest of corporate America. They didn't sit there and just go after the money. I mean, yeah, they included $45,000 for the two individual plaintiffs and $55,000 in civil penalties. You know, that's peanuts. You know, go back to Target and the class action lawsuit in the Ninth Circuit Court in California, which was the dumbest place to bring to try to fight something like this. $6 million they paid in punitive damages, and then they had to fix the website anyways. So this was not about money, but what the Department of Justice did, they restructured H&R Block's IT department. As part of the settlement, they said they will appoint a skilled web accessibility coordinator who will report to the CIO. They will adopt web accessibility policies. They will initiate training on accessible design for its web content personnel, evaluate employee and contractor performance based on successful web access programming, conduct regular automated user group testing, hire an improved outside consultant, us, hopefully, and prepare annual independent evaluations of online accessibility, and then, of course, the payments for legal fees and punitives. So this is absolutely unheard of. What the Department of Justice did is exactly what I would have done as a consultant if I'd been hired by H&R Block to come in and fix this problem. You have to kind of restructure the way you do things. It's business process improvement. Just like with e-commerce, when it came out 14, 15, 16 years ago, I ran around one company after the next. This technology's got to change your business. How do you realign your business processes to make the most out of this technology and make money at it? And it's a painful process for most organizations. So that was unheard of. I've never seen a situation where the Department of Justice has intervened on that level before. What it means in 2014 is basically your company must make all of their IT websites, web applications accessible to people with disabilities. This includes all IT websites and web applications accessed by both employees and the general public. It's no longer just a contracting issue. They are basically saying it's everything. 508 compliance. We all should be pretty familiar with that by now. It's been around for about 14 years. What you need to know about 508 is that the new version of 508, version 2, is basically going to harmonize with the international WCAG, or WCAG as I call it, versions. The difference between the two is really quite simple. Section 508 for the federal government is primarily what they want to happen in a web environment or EIT environment, electronic information technology environment. The international standards are very specific as to how it happens from a development standpoint. So the level of training and technical knowledge that needs to be communicated to web developers, software developers, is much, much more precise and technical than 508. So 508 is very quickly got to become a technical issue on a level that most people aren't comfortable with. Basically, 508, it got its teeth from the fact that it was adopted by the federal acquisition regulations. So it became a contracting issue. If you wanted to compete on a contract, you had to be 508 compliant when you delivered under the contract. Vendors selling electronic or information technology to the government had to be responsible for designing, manufacturing 508 compliant products and services. The government says we have a disproportionate number of people with disabilities that work for us. They are going to use these systems. It has to be accessible to them in order for them to do their jobs. What it means for you in 2014, again, if your company wants to be successful on federal contracts, it must ensure the accessibility of all information technology sold under contract. And you need to modify your own internal procurement agreements with your own vendors to basically ensure that you are purchasing 508 compliant electronic and information technology. I don't know how many of you go back to Y2K. I worked with Principal Financial on that back in the 90s. One of the first things we did was we sent a letter out to all of our vendors and we said, we will no longer buy from you if you are not Y2K compliant. We're going to stop the flow of non-compliant technology coming in, and now we're going to address cleaning up what we got. And that was the impetus in the marketplace for everybody who wanted to do business with such a huge company and other companies who implemented the same process in their procurement to say, we got to get our stuff cleaned up, otherwise nobody's got to buy our products or services. The same thing is basically got to happen with 508. I'm seeing more and more commercial clients building 508 provisions into their contracts with commercial vendors. Nothing to do with the federal government, nothing to do with state government. WCAG compliance, W3C Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's basically the international standards that deal with everything from blindness, low vision, deafness, hearing loss, learning disabilities, cognitive limitations, limited movement, speech disabilities, aging, or a combination thereof. They actually now have a new committee. Yes? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. They actually have a new committee that is totally focused on issues related to aging because of the demographics in the worldwide population with the baby boomers. The U.S. 508 standards will harmonize with the international standards, hopefully in 2014. They've been open to public comment for over a year. I'm not sure what's holding it up at this point. But basically, if any of you are looking at 508 compliance, you should already be looking at WCAG compliance. You know, for the last year and a half, all of our clients, we do both audits so that they are completely covered under both provisions. There's no point getting somebody 508 compliant and then the U.S. Access Board implements the new standards and then they got to go revisit the WCAG issues. So we just do it.
If you're a global company, would you suggest moving to the WCAG standards because they would include the requirements for the 508?
If you're a global company, the WCAG standards are the most appropriate standards because they are international in nature. And most global companies are way ahead of U.S. companies in dealing with this because of mandates in the EU, Australia, even African countries are doing some wonderful work in this area. If you want to do business in the United States with the federal government, and I've got clients that are international, and that's what they want to do. At this point, what I do is separate documentation for both.
Okay.
They get an audit report for 508. They get an audit report for WCAG. Right now, they put the 508 audit report on the table for the contracting officer and all the documentation that we provide, letter of certification, VPAT statement, et cetera, et cetera. But if down the road they get a notice that now you have to be WCAG compliant with the new 508 standards, we got them covered with that audit already, so they can produce it. Because really what it boils down to with 508 and WCAG is a paper trail. Everybody wants a paper trail. It's all about documentation. They want an independent third-party auditor to come in, provide them an independent assessment, say yes, no, this is compliant, this isn't compliant, and then document the heck out of it so that they can put that in their contracting file with any federal agency. And just this last week, I got 2 requests from 2 of my clients. They are closing out federal contracts, and the agencies have asked them to fill out a modified VPAT to ensure that everything they delivered for the last 2 years is 508 compliant. And there's a little provision in there that basically says if they find that it wasn't 508 compliant, that vendor will be brought back to fix it at their own expense. So even when the contract's over, you're still on the hook years later under this new process of issuing a VPAT at the end of the contract, which I hadn't seen before. 503 compliance. This was done by the Department of Labor, and basically it went into effect March 24th, and it's an interesting provision. The final rule establishes a 7% hiring goal for qualified individuals with disabilities by federal contractors. Okay, we're talking about federal contractors are Fortune 500 companies for the most part. You know, there's a lot that aren't, but the big players are the big companies anyways. 7% of your employees with disabilities. Do you have any idea what the cultural and organizational implications of that will be? Nobody's ready for that. I mean, it's unheard of. What it means is right now you have to create a strategic plan that can go on file with the Department of Labor that is a strategy for getting to the 7% hiring goal. And at some point down the road, a few years from now, they'll say, okay, everybody needs to be at the 7% hiring goal. But right now they're saying, give us your strategic plan to get there. It has to be on file with the Department of Labor before you can compete on federal contracts at a certain point. So it's going the same way that 508 did. You know, they passed it and then everybody had to figure out how to implement it. And eventually it really landed on contracting and procurement officers to do the implementation and file away the paperwork. But contractors apply the goal to each of their job groups or to their entire workforce if the contractor has 100 or fewer employees. Federal contractors must conduct an annual utilization analysis and assessment of the problem areas and establish specific action-oriented programs to address any identified problems. Okay, now think this through. If 7% of your workforce is going to be individuals with qualified disabilities, how effective are they going to be as employees when your entire enterprise is inaccessible to them? They can't do payroll, they can't get the cafeteria menu, they can't schedule a conference room, they can't read the PDF corporate memos that go out. You're not going to have a very effective workforce if that percent can't access the technology. We live in an information age. For an employee to be successful at what they do and to compete successfully with their coworkers for opportunities and promotion, they need access to the same information that their coworkers have, particularly if those coworkers don't have disabilities. To deny them access is discrimination in the new world that we live in. Hence, we'll get to Section 504. Section 503, major U.S. federal contractors consist of Fortune 500 corporations. If your company is currently not prepared organizationally and culturally, which it's not, and technically to support the needs of individuals with disabilities at the 7% goal, you got a lot of work to do. How many were around when e-commerce became the end thing and companies realigned business processes to take advantage of this new technology? It changed the way we did everything, internally, externally, who we defined as our clients, what we looked for in people that we hired, skill sets and such. Same thing's going to happen here. And what's really interesting is most job seekers don't like to self-identify as people, as an individual with disability. They don't want to be discriminated against. We're going to have an environment here where you're actually going to be in better standing if you are an individual with disability because the companies are trying to meet their goals. So Monster and places like that, job boards and DICE, and there's one client that we have, all they do is have a job board that they sell licenses to large corporations. Everybody is qualified IT developers with disabilities. And their business is just going through the ceiling. And it's not just this provision. There's other provisions that they try to meet that they have to satisfy for basically a diversified workforce. In order to attract and retain employees with disabilities, your company needs to undertake a multifaceted cultural and technical transformation. I call it inclusive organizational design. This is not a technical issue anymore. This is not about assistive technology anymore. This is about changing your corporate culture and all the things that flow from it. From the top down, hiring to retention to retirement planning to promotions to just cultural awareness so that people understand what people with disabilities are capable of doing. I still get calls from prospective clients who say, how does a blind person use a computer? I mean, we have outdated notions of what people with disabilities are capable of doing. So first, we start with awareness training. And I explain to them, you know, these are my employees. And I've got Brian, who is totally blind. He helped develop JAWS. He runs JAWS at 500 words a minute. And he can go through source code faster than any sighted developer sitting next to him. And he's totally blind. And that really blows people away. So we need to break down these barriers and concepts of what people can and can't do. And if put it in historical perspective, when the Civil Rights Act came out, the ADA came out, and civil rights dealt with issues related to race, ethnicity, religion, and we also dealt with gender bias. Back when I was growing up, the real barrier was the fact that people didn't think women had what it takes to be executives. You know, my dad would point out on TV when there was a woman CEO on TV being interviewed for 60 minutes, come in here, there's a woman on TV and she's a CEO. You know, it was that unusual. And people had preconceived notions about race and ethnicity as far as what people were capable of doing. So part of what we have to do is break down those outdated notions that probably never were valid to begin with, in my opinion, and get people to understand that everybody's got something to bring to the table of value for a company as an employee or as a consumer. Even though it became illegal to discriminate, particularly in banking and places like that, based on race and redlining and some of the practices back then, if you really look at it, the big problem was people didn't realize that was a consumer market base that had a tremendous amount of potential to create revenue for that company. Once they figured that out, they started marketing to the various segments of the population with that in mind. And the ones who've done it very successfully have made pretty good money. Section 504, this has been around for quite a while. You know it as workplace accommodation. So typical scenario is if you, for purposes of employment, you hired a qualified individual with a disability, you have to provide a reasonable accommodation. Normally, let's take somebody who is totally blind. Let's say you would provide them with appropriate office space, assistive technology like a screen reader. Maybe you would do some JAWS scripting on a few applications that were key to their work and basically put them in a bubble and say, now do your job. Okay? That was acceptable before. That is not acceptable anymore. That person has got to be able to access the payroll system. They have got to access the email system, the calendar system, the schedule system, because we live in an information age. And we all know it now. We all have tablets. We all have smartphones, etc. If you hire somebody and then only give them access to 2 applications when all their coworkers have access to dozens of applications, you are discriminating against them. So what that means, and we go back to 503 with the 7% hiring goal, your internal enterprise needs to be brought up to speed to accommodate the needs of people with disabilities. They have to have access to technology to be successful at their jobs. And under 504, over the next year, year and a half, trust me on this, you're going to see litigation like you have never seen before, where people are going to basically say, I don't have access to the enterprise, my colleagues do, we all recognize that it's required to be successful in this world today, I'm not putting up with it anymore. And the lawyers are lining up to set these cases up as we speak. So Section 504 is that legal requirement for employers to provide accommodations. What's different now is what accommodations mean. And most people, most judges, and most juries would say giving somebody access to just a handful of applications doesn't cut it, because they depend on technology to do their jobs, and they would realize how unfair it is. So if the IT enterprise is fundamentally not accessible, how can this be done? So your company cannot accommodate the needs of employees with disabilities if your internal IT is not 508 compliant or accessible. Section 508 now becomes an internal issue for your company, not just contractual with federal or state agencies. Aging in the workplace is the next biggie that is hitting. We know that the baby boomers are out there, and every year they're getting a bit older. We know that nearly half, 49% of the boomers still working, say they do not expect to retire until they are 66 and older, including 1 in 10 who predict they will never retire. And this was from a Gallup survey in January. What are you going to do when your employees start aging in the workplace? We know statistically 50% of people over the age of 65 develop visual and mobility issues. Well, this kind of leads to something else that's kind of interesting, and it's really being driven by mobile technology and accessibility. Assistive technology and assistive technology vendors historically have considered their market to be people with disabilities. This last year, they've totally changed that. Guess who likes the Zoom feature on their cell phones and their tablets? Everybody. Guess who likes the text-to-speech on their cell phones so they can hear their messages? Everybody. So the people who make Zoom text, Dragon Naturally Speaking, JAWS Screen Reader, all of those different assistive technologies, and there's tons of them, they're sitting there realizing, you know, that oversized keyboard is really appealing to older people. When I set my parents up with their tablets and internet access in their late 70s, you know, first thing Dad wanted to do, we wanted to go to wellsfargo.com and look at his accounts. The website was done in 8-point. I had to get the magnifying glass out to read it. I couldn't even read it, okay? So, you know, things have changed, but for Mother's Day, I just bought my mother a Boost phone so that it's easier for her to understand the conversation. She's 84. Plantronics Clarity Division, they're coming out with some wonderful devices. And by the way, accessibility includes electronic information technology as well. So when you're dealing with your IT enterprise for accessibility, look at your telecommunication system. If it's a network telecommunication system, that's got to be accessible. Right now, there's one on the market that I'm aware of, but I also know of a company that is bringing out a whole line of network telecommunication systems that are going to meet the accessibility requirements. So a lot of companies are preparing for this shift. So 50% of seniors over 65 will develop disabilities. Your senior, seasoned, experienced employees are going to come to you and say, I need help to do my job. And what do you got to do? You don't fire them. That's age discrimination, okay? And if it's a disability, you don't fire them as well. So you have a major accommodation issue on that level as well. So we know that due to the financial crisis of 2008, you need to be preparing for a workforce with people as high as 72 years old remaining in that workforce. And they are going to have specific needs. Maybe job sharing, you know, 2 elderly employees splitting a position 20 hours a week each might be something to look at. Everybody's got to come up with all sorts of great ideas and new ways to do things, telecommuting, et cetera, and things we haven't even thought about. But the thing is, these are your experts. They know your organization. They know your culture. They know your technology. They know your products and services. They're assets, not liabilities. So you want to protect them and ensure that they can do their job successfully. Just with the concluding remarks, you know, the old saying we've all heard is, nothing is certain but death and taxes. And the reality is, nothing is certain but disability, death, and taxes. Very few people just drop dead one day. Most people get sick, they linger, their abilities go down as a result of it. Most people will develop an injury. You know, what we know as curb cutouts on the street under the Architectural Barriers Act, how many moms with baby strollers have benefited from curb cutouts? How many people with bicycles have benefited from curb cutouts? Somebody coming back from Vail with a broken leg on crutches loves those, you know, curb cutouts. My personal history, 1992, massive head injury from a fall. 1996 at 30, cancer. 2000, pericarditis around the heart that put me in the hospital for about a week. Severely impacted my ability and stamina to do things. On the outside, I look perfectly healthy. I play in men's hockey league in Iowa. I was brought up in hockey, but there's certain things that I can't do for a certain period of time without it causing problems. And cognitively, before I came out here, I had an absolutely wonderful conference call with a prospective employee, a company, a couple of their senior managers. We talked for over an hour, and they sent me an email the next day thanking me for the call, very interested in working with us. I have no idea what I'm supposed to do for them. I can't remember. So I will contact him when I get back to Iowa and wiggle away into the conversation, and then he'll say something, it'll click, and then it's like, it'll flood back to me, and I'll be like, oh, I know exactly what I need to do, and then we'll do it. So I depend very heavily on documentation to do my work. If you want to get my attention, send me an email. It's right in front of me. I don't take it out and put it in a folder until it's done. If you call me, I may or may not remember everything you had to say. So, you know, you have learning disabilities, you have autism, you have Asperger's, you've got what is and is not disabilities anymore. It's not those people over there, it's us. How many have aging parents and are dealing with aging parents right now? How many have kids that are in special needs classes? I mean, we're all in this together, and I think that's the big thing that you need to take away from this, is that the marketplace for disabilities is you. It's your parents, it's your children, it's you. It may be a temporary disability, it may be a permanent disability. There's lots of invisible disabilities. I just hired a gentleman who just came back from Afghanistan, wonderful technical background, took 2 rounds in the spine. They took 1 bullet out, and there's still 1 live round in there. They couldn't get it out. And his vertebrae are collapsing every few months. And he also lost about 80% of his eyesight. And Leroy has got to be fantastic doing his work for me. fantastic. But like all my employees, I accommodate his needs. So I'm very laid back, very flexible scheduling. It's like, if you can't do an audit, I don't even want to hear why. I don't care. If you tell me you can't do it, that's all I need to know. I've got backup to cover for you. So most of my people have been with me for over 10 years. They are disabled. They are experts at their assistive technology. They provide nuance in the reporting that is just fantastic. We put 5 people together on an audit, visual, auditory, mobility, and cognitive, and 1 developer. And each one does an individual audit based on their assistive technology and their disability. We combine those into a master audit report that goes to the client, and it covers everything. A totally blind person gives me feedback that a partially blind person doesn't. A keyboard-only navigation person gives me feedback that somebody who uses a mouse doesn't. So it's a beautiful mosaic of a small disabled IT community, and the model works, and that it's a very flexible work environment. And it's ironic, they have a skill set that they can't go to college to learn. I want to hire people with disabilities. I want to create golden collar job opportunities for people with disabilities. Most of them get paid $90 an hour and up. Most of them have advanced degrees. And they do fantastic work, and I just love them to death. So we have to change our expectations of what we want out of our workforce as well. But EIT accessibility as a whole will have the same transformative effects on corporations that Y2K and e-commerce did. In the beginning, people were like, is Y2K real? And then in the end, nothing happened. Well, I worked on Y2K for Principal Financial Group. It was real. Hundreds and hundreds of people worked on retrofitting applications. Billions and billions of dollars was spent throughout the world, at least in the United States, probably trillions in the world. And it's only because of that we didn't have problems on a massive scale in 2000 when the calendar switched over. But it took a while for people to realize that they had to do something about it. So there's this awareness and learning curve that is just a natural process, etc., that people have to go through. And the same with e-commerce. You know, when the technology came out, I was lecturing on the internet and the wonders of the World Wide Web in 1992. Nobody even heard of the internet in 1992. By 2000, I was consulting with Fortune 100s, going in and realigning their business processes to take advantage of e-commerce. Same thing's got to happen with accessibility. We got to realign in order to make that happen. So what I'm pushing for the next year or so is trying to change the conversation. And if you go out to Criterion508.com, the first thing you see is a graphic that says rethink accessibility. This is not an IT accessibility issue anymore. This is not an IT focused problem anymore. At the ATIE conference, I spent the conference not in the sessions, listening to all the conversations that I've really heard for the last 14 years, although it was sprinkled with some new technology that was fascinating. This is a business issue, and it's the business side of the organization that's got to drive it. It's the people who recognize there's money to be made here, and how do we get there first to market? I mean, quite literally, this is a party everybody's coming to. Are you going to be dragged kicking and screaming and end up coming anyways, or you got to be first to market with products and solutions, not only for your customer base, but for your employee base, and turn it into a revenue-enhancing opportunity. Watch Target very carefully. They've gone from being the butt of jokes at accessibility conferences for the last 6 or 7 years. They are going to transform retail accessibility in a way that nobody has a clue right now of what they're up to. I do, but it's got to be fantastic. So it's inclusive organizational design. How do we think about the aging? How do we think about the disabled? What our expectations of these individuals are? Who are they? Once we get to that point, we're going to realize it's all of us. It's us in 10 years, 5 years, 20 years, 30 years. You know, that skiing accident, that car accident. Most of us, we're one illness, one accident away from becoming disabled. But disabled doesn't mean can't do anything. It means just need accommodation to keep doing what I've been doing. And we just have to get to that mindset to be successful with redesigning the organizations to accommodate that. Employers' employees need to modify their expectations of the disabled, and customers' employees in light of today's technology. Basically, since 2001, we've helped our clients advance equal opportunities for disabled customers and employees through technology. The reason I'm here today, my job is to provide the best services and recommendations to my clients, thousands of clients. Most, 80% have been with me for over 8 years. They just keep referring me to one division after the other. Most of them are on Wall Street here. I have a big presence in banking and insurance. And somebody in the industry that I know said, you got to look at Actuate's new product. And about 40% of our business is PDF accessibility. 100 documents here, maybe 1,000 here. And I asked for a web session to look at Actuate's PDF Accessibility Enterprise solution, and I was absolutely floored. A year ago, I would have told my clients, market unavailability. This technology does not exist to do what it's doing. And under 508, they would have been in the clear. It's unavailable in the marketplace, you can't do it, so you don't have to worry about it. The problem for them now is it exists. And because it exists, they have an obligation to start evaluating and hopefully implementing the solution for not only their customers, but their employees as well. So I'm here as a subject matter expert who does nothing but this type of work, who was incredibly impressed with what I saw. And it was very interesting. I called about 10 of my clients, my top clients, before I came out here, and I said, there's something that you've got to see. And would you come out and visit? Some of them did, and some of them basically want follow-up webinars or on-site presentations. But out of the 10 that I called, 2 were actually in the process of trying to create the same solution. And they were like, you're kidding. And I said, no. I said, why reinvent the wheel? And I doubt you've got to do it as well. And so they've stopped, and they're going to have meetings with the Actuate team and see if there's a good fit. So what was once technically impossible with electronic documents, which is as much information technology as anything else, is now possible. So Criterion is advising all of our clients, especially our Fortune 500 clients, to consider this enterprise solution as a critical piece to their inclusive organizational designs. Advances in technology like Actuate's solution today is going to make the process of changing the organization to accommodate the needs of employees and customers alike easier. I think there's got to be some great additional technologies coming down the road that, bundling of assistive technology into smartphone hardware, tablet hardware, smartphone operating system, tablet operating systems. The assistive technology manufacturers are saying our customer bases and people with disabilities who download our products or buy it off the shelf anymore. So they're aligning with the manufacturers of the technology to build it in because everybody wants it. And that's been the history of assistive technology. It starts out as something designed for people with disabilities. Other people see it and they say, we like this too, so we want it. And then it becomes mainstream technology. So that's kind of a snapshot of where I see us going over the next, within 5 years. Organizations that are proactive will have a very, very nice time in the marketplace, very nice time hiring and retaining great employees. Those that don't want to adapt to the changes are going to go through a very painful process and eventually a very costly process. Yes, there is going to be a tremendous amount of litigation over the next couple of years in all of these areas. But again, to me, this is just good business. It's not a disability issue per se. It's not an assistive technology issue per se. This is doing what's in the best interest of your customers and your employees, which ultimately is just good business. Are there any questions? None? Okay. I'll be here for the duration of the presentation, and afterwards, if anything comes up, just track me down. Oh, yes. Go ahead.
I wanted to talk about the two disability laws, part of 508 and the WCAG. In other countries over the world, they follow the WCAG, but I want to know why the U.S. is still following Section 508. Because the WCAG is more up to date and better to have one set law to follow, set of guidelines than it has to follow two different things?
Great question. The rest of the world is about 10 years ahead of the United States, quite honestly. And it really boils down to everybody wants to do their own thing. The United States wanted to create their own set of standards based on their own experiences, based on the needs of their own federal employees, etc. They have now come to the point where they realize that the international standards are more robust. I think if the United States had said, we're going to implement the WCAG standards 14 years ago, it would have flopped, because it would have been so intimidating for most clients to deal with. Instead, they created a broader, more understandable concept of, provisions A through P with some functional provisions that everybody could kind of get their arms around. And, so they slowly introduced the federal contracting workforce to the concept. Now that people are comfortable with it, they've got to up the ante and basically harmonize with the international standards, and everybody will be playing on the same playing field with the same rules now going forward. We're just waiting for the U.S. Access Board to implement. It's been open for comment for over almost 2 years now.
I was surprised because the U.S. is very strong with disability laws.
Yeah.
But the U.S. is better than other countries around the world when it comes to providing accessibility and as well as, like, for example, TV captioning. Other countries, most of them don't have that.
Yeah.
So that was, one example that really surprised me. That Section 508, I feel that's a little bit out of date. So
yeah.
I think that the WCAG would be better.
Absolutely. If you look at United States and Canada, Canada has the AOTA standards, but Canada is not a litigious society. Accessibility comes under human rights legislation, but it's not like people can just sue to get things done. The United States is a litigious society. If people want change, they get a lawyer and they make it happen, and they usually do it through class action status. So they look at us and they say, we don't get it. Why are you guys always suing? And we look at them, it's like, well, how can this be happening and be effective over in Canada when nobody sues over it? How do you make people comply? So I think different cultures have different ways of going about implementing these things, just based on, the ideology when it comes to carrots and sticks, quite honestly.
I have a question about, if you're a company that has to make a decision about how you're going to be creating information to be accessible to a large group of people. And it seems like there's a lot of movement to move away from PDF into like an EPUB format. And I'm wondering, is there a comparable service? You're talking about a solution for PDF and XML,
right,
which in my world is kind of an older set of technology for my customers who do not have disabilities. Right? And so now, everybody's in lockstep to do something with an easier programming with the EPUB. And I'm like thinking, oh my God, making decisions that we may not be able to accommodate.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Right now, a lot of people are staying with the PDF format because you can lock it down. The courts are comfortable with it. They're becoming more comfortable with e-signatures. Some courts still don't like e-signatures, but the ability to lock a PDF down and basically say that this is the original version, unaltered, from a legal perspective, is pretty widely accepted. That is not the case with HTML. That is not the case with XML. That's not the case with a lot of EPUB applications.
Right.
That's really what is going to preserve the PDF format for many, many years to come, unless somebody can come up with a new format that can assure, particularly the legal system, that these are legitimate documents that have been unaltered. PDFs are going to be around for a long, long time. And the bottom line is, the way this technology has been created by Actuate, whatever file format that is in the future, this will work with it. They can modify it in order to work with it. So this will change over time as the demand for document formats change. But it's the legal system that right now is keeping PDFs in place. Yes. Because you go to any corporation and you talk to anybody in HR or legal counsel, they send contracts out, lock down PDFs.
Right.
Yeah. It's always,
that I understand.
Right.
I think it's not about being able to lock down a contract for me.
Right.
It's about being able to deliver information that is necessary for the end user to move to where they need to go.
Yes.
And so there isn't a legal aspect about it, but there's still the concern about being able to provide an appropriate set of services that will meet their needs and not have us go into a whole direction that is going to be like the wrong decision. It's blue-gray.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, and the other thing with PDFs is a lot of our clients, again, about 40% of our work is in PDF accessibility. A lot of our clients are still print. And they want picture-perfect PDFs. You know, it needs to be exactly. I mean, these guys come back and say, you're missing a pixel over here. There's an extra space over here. They want it to be picture-perfect with the print version of what they deliver under contract. And, of course, the PDFs make that more possible than the other.
But for us, it uses up way too much download time.
Oh, absolutely. They're larger files.
And the end user can't accommodate that volume. So,
well, and, you know, what I would suggest is, you know, have a good discussion with the Actuate people. Tell them what your requirements are, the issues that you're encountering with your client base. Let their people go to work. They're going to be enhancing this solution for years to come. Maybe they can build it in. Now, this stuff should not make anybody afraid. These are great opportunities. I mean, we're living in an absolutely wonderful time. Don't be afraid of this. Embrace it. It's change. I know people don't like change. You got to learn some new things. People don't like to learn new things. But look at where we've come since 1990 with technology. I mean, do you remember what it was like before we had cell phones? You know, now it's wonderful. We love the stuff. So this is just the next step in the evolution of technology. Don't be afraid of it. Embrace it and turn it into a moneymaker for your organization. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.